What's up, guys? It's your girl Stacy Cake, your host for What's Hot, and I finally saw Backrooms. Okay, if you watched my trailer reaction, you know I was kind of underwhelmed by the trailer. I thought it started off really strong, but it kind of like failed to evoke any true emotion or curiosity for me. But hearing that so many people talked about it and a lot of people were like kind of pushing back on my criticism of the trailer, I went and saw it. Long story short, I feel like my feelings about the trailer, some of my feelings about the trailer carried through when I watched the movie, and I still feel kind of like they were relying on people to have context from the YouTube series to kind of fully get you invested in this. But for new people to the franchise, such as me, like I feel like it left something to be desired as well as understood. So I heavily did some research, and I'm going to be breaking down the ending of Backrooms and kind of share a little bit of my challenges with the movie as we go through. So if you like this type of content, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment, and let's get into it. So I could not ignore this film despite how much I wanted to. It was A24's biggest opening weekend ever, coming out with making $81 million its first weekend. So obviously we have to talk about it, but I personally felt like I left with more questions than necessarily answers after watching the film. So I dug in, I did a little bit of research, and this is my understanding of Backrooms, the ending specifically. So, Backrooms follows our main character. His name is Clark, and he's a divorced, bitter furniture salesman whose dreams of being an architect kind of plummeted because he is being the ultimate provider for his wife, and some resentment has grown there in that relationship because she kind of says he's blaming her for not achieving his dreams, and he is blaming her because he's saying, you don't help me with anything, I'm just paying for everything you want to do, and this is why my dreams have stalled. So that's kind of building this resentment within him. We get to see him meeting with his therapist, and they do this kind of like role playing skit to help him work through his emotions and kind of relive the situation, because his wife has kicked him out of the house that he's paying for, and he is now living inside of the furniture store where he works. So we get to see all of this pretty quickly in the film. And while sleeping in his furniture store, he discovers kind of like a portal into another dimension in the basement of the furniture store. And that's what's going to kick off our adventure in this film. This is the crux of our storyline in the film. And so it's like a maze in here, and it just kind of never ending. And he actually starts to find it complicated to get back into, I guess, the real world per se. So he outlines a door on the wall so he can know where he entered and where he came back. But it's clearly like another creature living in this dimension. And we get to see, this is what brought some confusion for me, which I'm going to touch on later. In the opening kill scene, we get to see this guy in his hazmat suit kind of panicking, trying to get help before he is devoured and killed by a creature that we don't get to see. Fast forward to our storyline with Clark. When he gets in there, we know that there's some sort of creature or movement happening. It's just, you just get real eerie vibes, okay? And then he calls in his assistant manager and her boyfriend to come and film what he saw. Needless to say, that goes left. They get killed. He leaves this kind of ominous message on his therapist's voicemail, which is like him saying he's not coming back because he told her about the back rooms, but she didn't believe him. So he's like, yeah, like I opened the window and I'm not coming back. So this leads her to go to his store to find him. Like, yo, like, are you good? She's a caring therapist. She's going to check on her client. She goes downstairs in the basement. She's seeing he's done mapped out all of like the back rooms layout, or tried to map it out, because as we know, it's kind of like forever changing. She finds the portal. She goes in. She encounters Clark. He is acting crazy. He got like these like copies of people that are like, what I understand, one is his ex-wife, and I'm not sure who the other guy was. I'm not gonna hold y'all, but like he has these, and he's essentially gone psychotic, and he's like, he scalps the copy of his ex-wife, puts it on his therapist, and makes her reenact the scene again with him sitting in this dining room table that is a mimic of his house where his wife lives. So that brings us to, she ends up talking him down. Like, she gets real with him. Like, you just don't want to take accountability for your own life. You blame everybody for this. Mind you, he's done choked his therapist up and tied her up, and is forcing her to reenact the scene with him. So in the midst of the scene, she goes, yeah, you just don't want to take accountability. Everything is everyone else's fault. This is why your wife really left you. Like, she just give it to him straight up, raw, real. And it seems to work and crack something in him. So he gets up to let her go. But he also is faced with the reality that it's a part of him that doesn't want to change. And he says that. We finally kind of get to see this encounter with this monster that's been terrorizing, killing his assistant manager, her boyfriend, and just causing disruption. And it's Clark. It's a giant kind of clay version of Clark dressed as the mascot for his furniture store, which we get to see him kind of take on in the beginning of the film to make this commercial for the store. He's dressed up as this one-legged pirate for to do a commercial, and this mascot has become real. It has manifested in the back rooms, and it's like huge and trying to like take everybody out. The mascot picks him up, and he's like kind of, you can see visibly shaking, but he's still trying to like talk to this giant version of himself as a friend. Doesn't go right, goes left. Takes a chunk out of him. The lady starts dipping, is chasing the lady. Long story short, she gets to she sets off this kind of like trap, and these scientists, these evil kind of researcher scientists, grab her, the guys in the hazmat suits that we saw from the beginning. They grab her, take her back to this kind of lab, I guess, in the real world, and they basically tell her like, yeah, after what you saw, we can't really promise that we're gonna let you go. But then in the end, it takes to a shot where she's sitting in the back rooms, and it's a copy version of her in the lab that she's in. So I was confused. So I'm like, okay, like, did they put her back in the back rooms? Like, I was confused. So this is where my research comes in. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with a term that I feel like should have been included in the first installment, because it's been said, like, the director has been very clear that this was not meant to be a standalone film. There's going to be more parts to this. However, I feel like there is a particular term that I feel like we should have learned in the first film, and that's a still life. And a still life is an entity created in the back rooms from a memory of a person who has traveled there. So the copy of Clark's wife, the copy of the therapist, I think her name was Mary or whatever, those copies of them, the mascot version of Clark are copies. And these are still life entities. They don't really have much emotional reactions. They're kind of distorted and disfigured. I feel like that's a phrase we should have learned in the first one, and maybe that's something that the scientists could have said. That's a phrasing that Clark could have developed to kind of communicate what he was seeing in the back rooms or something, and we just never get that. And I feel like this is where the film kind of slacks to me in grabbing in new viewers and people that are new for the franchise. But regardless, to kind of dive into the explanation of what's going on in the Backrooms. So the Backrooms is consuming parts of people. So when you visit the Backrooms, it is, think of it as you're spilling parts of yourself into this dimension, and it's learning from you. It's feeding off of you the more time you spend in there, and it's developing its world. It's developing the layout, the floor plan of the back rooms based on the information that is sucking out of you and feeding off of you the more time you spend in there. So it's feeding off of your memories, and it's creating this space. It's the dimension is creating itself based on the information that is gathering from you as a person, but specifically your memories. So that's going to bring us to the monster, which I have the biggest issue with in this movie. So I get the monster is a reflection of Clark's issues. It's a reflection. It's the part of Clark that he doesn't want to face, and it's manifested. It's the part of himself that I truly think that he hates. That's my interpretation of it. And it's just out of control because we can clearly see too, Clark has some anger issues. I feel like that's kind of evident. He has built up anger and resentment within him, and I think this mascot represents that to a T. And he hates his job. He hates the things that he has to do. He hates that aspect of his life, and it has all taken form into this monster because he's refused to deal with it. And that's something that the therapist has addressed with him, specifically in the scene where he has her tied up in the back rooms at the dining room table. So we see that as Mary, the psychiatrist, the therapist, is fleeing from Pirate Clark, the mascot monster, Backrooms is starting to transform into parts of her childhood because she had the mentally disturbed mother who had this phobia. I forget the exact wording. Had this phobia that basically makes you afraid to leave your own house, and which I think was a very interesting and cool kind of director's writer's choice to include in this, considering what the Backrooms are. But we see it kind of begins to shape based on her memories of her childhood. And I think that's essential to kind of understanding exactly what the Backrooms is. But however, I feel like what gets confusing and a part that I still don't understand is the monster. So, like, I guess each person's monster is different, but it's very unclear, and I guess that's something we would understand more as the franchise continues. But let's get into Mary at Async headquarters. So this I had to like script out a little bit because it just was kind of over my head. So let's get into it. At Async headquarters, Mary is brought to an interrogation room and meets the researcher Phil, and we get to see Phil earlier in little clips throughout the movie. And Phil is a scientist, but he used to be like an MRI machine manufacturer. But he found the Backrooms, and his whole company became kind of like invested in researching and discovering and learning more about the Backrooms in this dimension. And they're trying to map the entire dimension. And Phil reveals that there are becoming more and more portals into the Backrooms. It's not just a one way in and one way out. There are multiple portals that are just opening up around the world. And whatever caused that wall to crack open in Clark's furniture store, it's not an isolated incident. And that's what his company is trying to understand. And we never clearly get to know what's going to happen with Mary, but it's kind of very clearly implied that she's not going to be free again. And he keeps trying to poke at her and pick her for information about what she knows and what she's experienced since she's been in the Backrooms. And the way the scene is shot, it gives you the answer, like kind of phony dialogue, that they're not the type of organization that's going to let you walk out with this type of information and be in the world. You are now an experiment, a subject, a prisoner to their research, their organization. So Mary's freedom is kaput, done, over. And now, like, like with the ending, this is kind of the shot that everyone is talking about, and it's while Mary is like with Phil being interrogated in that like kind of room, laboratory looking room, like the camera cuts back to Backrooms, which confused me at first. But from my understanding, it's like we can see it's a replica of the interrogation room that Mary is actually in. And Mary is like kind of distorted, disfigured. She's been copied. So the backrooms don't just track people, they can learn from people and they continue to feed off of them even after they've left. And the dimension absorbed enough of Mary, her memories, her mannerisms, her psychology, that it began creating a copy of her. And the interrogation room still life isn't a leftover monster, it's a brand new monster. It's not something old, it's active, it's a living thing, which changes this whole concept of like, okay, like once you're there, you're never really free from it. It's like you've permanently left part of yourself in here, and it's connected to the dimension that you came from, which is insane to kind of wrap your head around. But this kind of recontextualizes everything Clark said early in the film. And the backrooms are every place that ever was, but they're also becoming every person who ever even walked in. And it's active, it's learning, it's continuing to grow. And some critics have said like this is like a deeper metaphor, because the director Kane Parsons said that, you know, again, he intended the backrooms to comment on technology and generative AI specifically, with the still lifes representing soulless recreations that capture the shape of a person without like any of the actual emotions that humans have. However, the film to me fails to kind of like it fails to kind of translate that into layman's terms, shall I say. And I get there should be room for interpretation with film, but I just feel like because there's so much going on, so many layers to this movie, we have to have something in it a little more explicitly stated, especially if you don't have experience with the YouTube series. And that's my biggest criticism here. But when the film ends, Mary's double is sitting silently in a warped room, and we don't get to know that Mary is dead or anything. It's just telling you that a version of her now exists in this dimension, and it's gonna keep existing there, isolated, disfigured, just wholly incorrect forever. And then she's a prisoner there. Part of her is a prisoner there, while she's also really a prisoner at the Async facility where she was talking with Phil. Now, the director, Kane Parsons, said that this ending, although it was very frustrating to me and many other people, was intentional because this is not meant to be a standalone film. It's kind of intentionally meant to be a cliffhanger. But I just feel like it was just something left to be desired. It didn't have to be fully resolved, but to me it wasn't a clear cliffhanger either. It just like it made me want to know more, but it didn't make me want the story to continue, if that makes sense. It made me want to know like, hey, just like an explanation for like exactly what is happening here. But I get that Phil also said that they don't know, so that's kind of how they're stringing us along with it. But I still feel like this is only exciting for people who have experience with the YouTube series. That's just my opinion. I feel like even if we didn't get an explanation of the whole backrooms, because the scientists, the researchers are still figuring it out. Clark is new to the backrooms. I feel like there were a couple of plot holes that I feel like I really wanted to be resolved. One, I feel like we needed to at least see one other person's monster to kind of confirm what was happening here, because Pirate Clark clearly wasn't the hazmat guy's monster in the opening scene, right? Like, see, I don't even know. So, like, I feel like we needed to see some type of figure or monster there. Two, Clark, did he kill Kat? Like, what happened with that scene? Like, we see something pick up the camera. What happened with Kat and Clark when the monster picked up the camera? Frustrating. I feel like those two things were kind of just two things that would have really helped keep the new viewers especially, more invested and ready and prepared to go into the next thing, because now I just feel like you're breadcrumbing me. It just wasn't enough. But I'm gonna rate this film a 3 out of 5 flames. I don't know, maybe like a 2.5 out of 5 flames, because while it was interesting, it was also kind of very vague and just like some slow but intriguing parts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Feel free to chime in on some of the plot holes that I mentioned or some of the things that I just wasn't super happy with. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment if you like this type of content. And I will see you guys next time.